When we talk about Scottish history, we tend to picture kilts, castles and clans. But what if I told you that South Asians are part of Scotland's war history, its industrial story and the shipyards? Yet most of us were never taught any of it. In fact, I didn't actually learn that some of my ancestors fought in World War I and II until my paternal grandfather told me long after I left school. Today's episode is about the history we weren't taught and why reclaiming it matters. It matters for a number of different reasons, but I hope that this episode can help fuel us in the fight against the far right, who very often paint pictures of South Asian communities as lazy or uninterested in being Scottish or British. Welcome to the DemocraTEA podcast. I'm your host, Anam Gesar, and this week we're in conversation with Dr Saqib Razak. Dr Saqib is part of Colourful Heritage. This is a Scottish heritage organisation dedicated to documenting, preserving and sharing the diverse histories of South Asians communities in Scotland. Through different means, it works to ensure that these often overlooked stories are recognised as an integral part of Scotland's national story. And before we dive in, thank you so much for watching DemocraTEA. It truly is an honour to interview some really fascinating people, learn more about their journeys, and then share that with you. If you don't mind, I have one wee favour to ask. It would be really helpful if you could please hit subscribe and follow us on social media. It's completely free to do so and helps us grow. And the more we grow, the bigger guests we can bring on and continue having really interesting conversations. Right, let's spill the tea. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Saqib.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So we start every episode with chatting about what is in our cup of tea. And I want to apologise, first of all, because you gave me strict instructions. It was Tetley tea, soya milk.
Yes, soya.
And I forgot both the Tetley tea and the soya milk. So you are stuck with, you're drinking, what is it again?
Today I'm drinking pure chamomile. Nice and
very
relaxing.
zen.
Yeah.
Very zen. I'm drinking strawberry and raspberry, which has never been my bag. But since my episode with Atta Yaqub, I have become addicted to fruit teas. So I'm sure Atta is pleased with that.
Sure he will be.
So thank you so much for joining us. You are part of an organisation called Colourful Heritage. Before we dive into the history of South Asians, where did the name stem from, first of all? Because it's a really interesting name. And where did the organisation stem from?
So I guess Colourful Heritage has now been around since about 2010. And it's actually been around since before even I started working with Colourful Heritage. So it was a group of social entrepreneurs that, would get together and discuss matters of the community, how to benefit the community, what was happening in the community. And they realised that a lot of the elders within the community, and we're not just talking about, the sort of Muslim elders, we're talking about South Asians in general. A lot of friends' parents and grandparents were passing away. So I guess from that, the name comes Colourful Heritage because, together we weave a certain pattern, and we're all different types, different sorts, different backgrounds. So I guess that's where the name Colourful Heritage came. And that's where Colourful Heritage started.
Yeah, that is so lovely. And it's really, really important that we reiterate that it's not just documenting the history of South Asian Muslims. It's for South Asian Sikhs, South Asian Hindus, South Asian Christians, from all our non-faiths.
That's right. So it's about everybody that's in Scotland that is of a South Asian background and Muslim background as well, that have a story to share and to tell. And in fact, I forgot to mention, it all started over a cup of tea.
A cup of tea? That feels very actually poignant. So how did that happen?
Like I said, this sort of group of social entrepreneurs would get together and discuss, they were genuinely concerned for what was happening, what's going on in Glasgow, in Scotland. And I think from their parents, they realised that there was a lot of history and heritage, from the stories they're being told. And I guess that's where it all started, that they wanted to have a formal way of documenting it. They thought that was really important.
Yeah, and like you say, ultimately the elders were passing away and those stories then would have been lost, right?
Absolutely. And the stories is not, and these are not just, these are people that are everyday, people that work in shops and businesses that are, the retired sort of grandparents, the mothers, the fathers, or sort of four fathers and four mothers, and the kind of struggles that they faced coming to Scotland, whether they were working or not, actually, just their stories were just inspirational. So many stories.
Has Colourful Heritage found a person that you would think is the first South Asian that had come to Scotland?
It's very interesting because whenever I look up something and I find a name, or I've read about somebody, there's always somebody that turns up that's even before that.
Okay.
So one of our resources is, and we'll come on to that probably later on, is the digital timeline. And believe it or not, that starts in 1855.
1855?
Yes.
Wow.
So in 1855, we have the story of Maharaja Dalip Singh, and he is the son of the ruler of Punjab in Lahore, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So when he was deposed, he actually came to Scotland. So he was brought to Scotland, and it was through, I think, some colonel or lieutenant who used to live in Orkney, and through him, he ended up being deposed here in a place called Grand Tully in Perth.
Yeah.
So near Castle, and I'm probably not going to say this right, spelt as Menzies, but it's Castle Mingus. So I was just blown away by that story.
Wow, that's fascinating. 1855.
Yeah, and we've managed to capture that with the BBC Landward. So we've had Rupa from the Gurdwara, who does the radio show Radio Vaz, and she's come on to talk about the sort of history and what that means for Sikhs in Scotland and how that's so deep rooted. A connection with Punjab and obviously Scotland here as well, in Perthshire, Punjab and Perth.
Punjab and Perth. There we go. Who would have known that Punjab and Perth would have a link that goes all the way back to 1855?
Yeah. And in fact, just recently, so another, there's a whole load of, doctors, for example, that came in the late 1880s. There's Mirbai Vakil. She studied at Glasgow University. She's part of their archives. We've also got, let's see who else. There's a whole load of people. But one of the other ones we have is somebody called Nathu Muhammad. And now I'm thinking he's come round about 1918. And then I realised that somebody called Dunda, Noor Muhammad Dunda, who didn't really know much about at all, came round about 1916 to Glasgow. And just recently, in fact, I'll tell you a really interesting story. Just recently, in fact, I'm not even sure how, probably because of we've got some information about Dunda and Ashraf Warehouse on our website and, through our school's resource pack. Somebody from Pakistan contacted me just before Christmas and said, I am the great-grandson of Noor Muhammad Dunda. I know he lived in Glasgow. Can Colourful Heritage tell me more about him? Because apparently, because apparently he had, which is another story that we hear quite a lot, is he had a wife in Pakistan, or in those days actually it wasn't called Pakistan, it was India. But when he came here, he also married a Scottish or, an Irish Catholic, I think it was, which is very often the case. And so he had children from that as well. But this was a story that they didn't realise. And so a number of years ago, so I rattled my brain together and I thought, a number of years ago, I interviewed a lady who unfortunately now has dementia, but I remember her telling me that she was related to Mr. Noor Muhammad Dunda. So I managed to have this conversation with her, get in touch with her brother, who eventually I linked him up with this great-grandson. And just in the last couple of days, he started sending us pictures of what Dunda looked like. Now, I had an image of him from a really old newspaper clipping from the 1960s. But the fact that there's new imagery coming through, this person posted a picture, an email picture of his father with Mr. Dunda. And then he brings out a picture of the two daughters that Mr. Dunda had, Mary and Devinda. And it just helps to humanise the story. So sometimes, through the work that we've done, we'll maybe put out something and eventually somebody will find it and get in touch and we can help to link them. And I might not have found these stories otherwise, it's only because somebody had written in.
I'm taken aback. I
Yeah.
honestly expected that we were going to sit and have a really lovely conversation about people who have moved over, but that's reminded me that there's a real human element here.
Mm.
That's this actual people, real lives. And of course, when people have come over from South Asian countries, more often than not, back in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, their births, deaths haven't been recorded. Children haven't been recorded. They don't have the same system that we have here in the UK. And so it must have been really difficult for anyone there to find out information. But because of the work that Colourful Heritage have done, he was able in Pakistan to find a relative in Scotland.
Yeah.
That is, I'm lost for words.
That's one story, and we've had several like this.
Yeah.
We've had somebody from India contact us because I recorded an interview for one of the Hindu gentlemen at the Mandir, and that person must have typed up their name and it came up with their interview. So they got in touch with us to say, this is a long lost neighbour of my parents that used to live in somewhere down south. Can I get in touch? So of course I have to then get in touch with the person and check. And it turns out it was true. So managed to connect people.
That's so lovely.
And same with somebody in USA, somebody got in touch after a few days after posting an interview. They said, this was somebody that I knew in Fort William. It was an Asian family that lived there. And they said, this is somebody that I know. And I'm surprised to see them now. And, the way they're talking, what they're talking about. Can I get in touch? So it's happened a couple of times. It's really nice and heartwarming when that happens.
That must feel really rewarding then as well.
Very rewarding. Makes it all the worthwhile.
Because ultimately, when the older generation pass away, their stories are going to be lost. And you said that it's not just people that are like in high positions that you've interviewed. You've interviewed people from all walks of society, right?
So we've interviewed people that are, working maybe in shops, or they're just even, for example, they might be housewives, mums. They maybe not have worked in a professional environment. And some of the stories that come out are just fascinating. I think somebody had got in touch with me just recently, not recently, sorry, a couple of years back actually, and they said that they wanted to have their dad's story heard. And I was really thinking, okay, it's probably going to be the usual kind of story. I was just blown away. It was, I don't know if you know, but recently there's been the new hypermarket that's opened up where the ABS used to be.
Yeah.
So it was actually the history of what ABS was before that. It was known as D&D Cash and Carry. And it was owned by a guy called Nawab Dean. Now, Nawab Dean, he was the first person, I believe, to have built a purpose-built cash and carry. And I think it clashes with around about the same time as Castle Cash and Carry by Yaqub Ali. So they're of the same generation. But it was just fascinating that this purpose-built building and why her dad had built this, and also the name D&D stands for Dean and Darcy. So it was her mother's name as well in there. And she did a whole, story about this, and that's on our website as well.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Suraya Dean, she talked about her father and the difficulties and what happened to the cash and carry. Amazing.
And when you're documenting these stories, are there any themes that seem to reoccur?
Yes. One of the themes that comes across is obviously the men that came across first, because, they're coming to pastures new. We find that they're coming with very little, and in order to come here, they've had to save up and sell things or put things on loan, and the family have worked really hard in order for them to come here, and they've had that drive and passion to come here. And when they've arrived here, they've had, a couple of pounds in their pockets. But then another really nice, heartwarming story comes across is when they come here and they're able to be part of another community of friends, and how one another have helped one another out. So very often when they've come, they've been living in flats or houses, mainly flats in the sort of Gorbals area, which was quite a deprived area at the time. And I believe a lot of the Jewish community used to have businesses there and probably stayed there along with the Irish community in the initial days in sort of 20s, 30s, 40s. And what you find is they've come here and they've helped one another. So if a new person's arrived, they've let them stay with them until they've got onto their feet and found a job, let them sleep. But there's multiple people in the house. It's not just one or two. We're talking, 6, 7, 8, 10 people. And they're, sort of sharing facilities, sharing cooking, sharing responsibilities. Even, one in the bed, one out the bed, kind of because they're working round the clock, doing all sorts of shifts. But I think the sort of South Asian story of it is, in a sort of nutshell, is many of them came here initially and worked as peddlers. Do you know what a peddler is, Anna?
No.
So we have this thing nowadays that, the South Asians or the migrant communities come and they're taking over our jobs. But the peddlers, they created their own jobs. So that was their introduction to being entrepreneurs. So peddling is essentially door-to-door selling. So what they would do is they would get a few items into a suitcase or actually quite a lot of items, and provide a service to people that lived out of the cities that couldn't drive in. Not like the way women and men can drive in nowadays. There wasn't that many cars in those days. And they would do that service to take belongings out to them, take items out to them to sell. And they would chap on the door, and these guys would be called Johnny. And sometimes would even be referred to as Johnny the Darkie. So they faced a lot of abuse as well at the same time. But at the same time, they did also meet some really wonderful people that were just open up their homes and welcome them. And, they realized that this is a service. So they would sell those items. So they'd buy them from the warehouses and sell those items and then be able to pay off, whatever they owe the warehouses. And very often the warehouses would give them items on credit. So it was on a loan because they were helping out their comrades. They were helping out, their countrymen, regardless of whatever faith they were part of.
And you know what's really stuck out to me there is two things. First of all, I got really emotional when you were telling that because I was thinking of my own Nana Abu, so my maternal grandfather who came to the UK in the 60s. And I actually don't know what his life was like for him when he first moved over, and he passed away many years ago and I can't ask him, which makes me really sad because I actually would have loved to have known and learnt from him. And second of all, what really sticks out to me is what you just said at the end there was that regardless of faith, the people in the cash and carries were giving them credits and loans to help them. And that is so at odds at what we hear from the far right now. And in actual fact, I'd go one step further. Regardless of whether you're South Asian and working class or you're white and working class, you've got more in common with each other than the millionaires and billionaires. And that message seems to be missed out from so much of society.
Yeah. So, I mean, they really helped one another out. And I think that's the same across a lot of the businesses. So the warehouses would be owned by, many in the Jewish community as well, but also the South Asian community, like Dunda and Usher, for example. That was one warehouse. There was lots of others, but that's the one that we know a lot more about. And they would very often, let people have, jumpers and skirts and whatever else they were selling on a loan so that they could go out, and if they sell it, they could then pay it back. So it's almost like a bank, because maybe it's a way to get them started off and get them onto that kind of, ladder of sort of financial ladder. And just helping out in terms of, what I do remember when I interviewed the grandson of Atta Ashraf, who's the other partner in this warehouse, he said that they would not only give out loans, but also when they came, they would sit down and discuss issues and problems that they had. So it was like a social meeting place, because this is a time before any of the mosques were built, any of the gurdwaras, and of course the very first mosque and gurdwara, the mosque in Oxford Street, that was built in the 40s, created in the 40s. And then the very first gurdwara in South Portland Street was also around about that same time. And what's really interesting is that Mr. Atta Ashraf is the person who initiated the first mosque. And also he had this warehouse. So he had this, I guess, responsibility for his community. And, I've even heard stories of people coming over and staying with Muslim people that were coming and staying with the Sikh community that were in the Gorbals at the time because they knew them from the villages. So it's a fascinating interview with Muhammad Shafi. Speaks in Punjabi. I think he came over in 1948, and he says he came and stayed with Gurdar Singh. How beautiful was that?
I'm speechless. And I'm not very often speechless. That is such a beautiful story because it's so human and like there's just so much to it in terms of resilience, in terms of leaving everything that is known to you back in Pakistan or India, or rather the Indian subcontinent as it was back then, coming here. But also a story of kindness and compassion
Yeah, and
and
friendship.
actually in friendship and just understanding and appreciating that everyone's going through a really difficult time and everyone's got very little. What you said before of people coming to this country with only a few pounds. What I do know about my Nana Abu's story is that when he came to Rochdale in the 1960s, he had very, very little, had to work in factories. I don't know if he did peddling, and I'm gonna go back and ask I don't think my mum would know, and maybe one of my uncles might know. I might ask them and see if they know or remember of the story.
What I was going to say, what's really interesting actually is so the Scottish story, Scottish South Asian story, is very different to the story of people in England at the time, South Asians in England. So when people came to Scotland, that's one of the first kind of jobs you could say that they started to do. So they were working for themselves. They could choose where they wanted to go, when they wanted to work, where they wanted to go, and go peddling. But the story down south, and this is actually it has a bit of an impact, but the story down south is that a lot of people worked in factories. So when you're working in a factory, you're in quite a closed environment. You're meeting the same people, right? And so there's only so much you can learn and talk when you're not broadening your horizon. But the peddlers that came, the people that worked as peddlers, they were meeting different people. So they were picking up of cultural
Yeah, I
nuances,
suppose, and
you
language
know,
skills.
language skills, being able to travel. It was a lot more independence.
So this actually makes sense then,
Yeah.
because my nana came, they moved to Rochdale in the 60s, and then in the late 70s they moved up to Scotland. So that's when they moved up to Edinburgh. My nana was part of helping to find, I think, Annandale Street Mosque over in Edinburgh. But that does make sense then. So I think he would have come over, worked in factories, but then was able to get enough money and save enough money whilst also living over here to call his wife and 5 kids
And I
over.
think businesses were beginning to take off here. And if you think about, the peddlers, that they're doing business, this is the start of a business, and they're picking up all these amazing skills, right? Language skills, cultural skills. And then, they're gathering also enough money to be able to then open up a shop. And in the shop, they need all of these skills again to speak to customers,
Yeah.
to sort of essentially run a business. And I know that in the sort of 70s, 80s, that's when the sort of entrepreneurship was quite rife in Scotland. There's a lot of people that had shops. And I know we're known for like the corner shops, but, not to be taken lightly. These were important sort of, it means you're not doing any job, you're actually working for yourself.
Yeah.
So you're
But
able
also you're
to,
part of the community
you're part
then,
of the
because you
community.
didn't
Yeah.
have the big supermarkets the way you do
No.
now.
Mm.
Those corner shops were integral
Yeah.
in neighbourhoods and communities.
Yeah. And also being able to provide job opportunities for others, which were of Scottish origin, so you weren't just, you've got your business now, but you're employing people from the local community. I don't know if you remember, but, some of the bigger cash and carries would have a lot of ladies, Scottish ladies that were working for them, not sort of non-South Asian ladies. So they were giving them jobs in turn as well. And I've even, to the point where I've even interviewed somebody that said they had a Scottish nanny at the time because both she was a teacher, her husband was working, he had his own petrol station, and they had a nanny that looked after the children. And when they paid her, they paid it towards a house for her so that she could get, be able to buy a flat.
Wow.
So this is the kindness and the contribution. And, she was like part of a family. They still to this day talk so fondly of her. There's just so many amazing stories, honestly. It's so touching, showing kindness, showing warmth, care, love, and resilience above all. Because it's not easy coming, especially when your clothing, the weather, the language, the food,
Everything's different.
everything is different.
Every single thing is different.
But yeah, when they came, they were wearing, they changed from their dhoti, kurta, shalwar kameez to wearing trousers, smart suits. In fact, one of the pictures of the Dundas warehouse has peddlers lined up outside and in the 1950s, and they're all wearing trench coats, Al Capone, no, I can't say that word, Al Capone style. They've got the trench coats, the hats, the ties, the shirts, looking very, very smart.
That is so interesting.
Mm.
And so you've spoken about the kind of common themes with men coming over from South Asian countries. Have you found common themes for women? Because their journeys were so different. You initially had men from South Asian countries move, I think a lot of them moved like the 50s, 60s, 70s for job opportunities kind of post-war. But of course they came over single, had to leave their wives and children behind, then save money to then bring them over. Was there common themes when you've interviewed women of that generation?
So some of the women we interviewed said they came over because, they came over because the husbands were here. So to make it very clear, they didn't come over just for the work. They came over because the husbands were here. So it really was just, getting a one-way ticket, and this is it. You've left everything there, left your family, friends, and that's it. You're coming here, left your family, siblings,
Everything that's
everybody that you know, and everything that you know, and come to this alien world, I
That's
would
very
imagine.
cold and wet, and people have a strong Scottish accent.
Yeah, alien culture. You can't understand anybody. And so the only person you really do know is your husband. So yeah, I've come across that quite a lot in the sort of 1950s.
Yeah, that must have been really isolating for them as well as women.
Very isolating, but at the same time, women were very resilient. And so because, like I said before, they all lived in sort of the Gorbals area, and then from the Gorbals, they eventually moved to the Pollock Shields area. With the way the system is in the tenements, you're living upstairs, downstairs, across the landing. I think they were very resilient in forming their own friendships and communities. And from that, they were able to learn a lot of information and pick up, language, and be able to speak their language very freely, Punjabi, Urdu, Hindi, whatever it was, and make friends across the board. So I've heard
And then I
of that.
suppose within those friendship groups, they were able to build communities. Actually, do you know, I don't know if I'm saying it right, is the thing where older South Asian women will get together and save money?
Yes.
Committees.
So I
I
know
don't
about
know if I've
this.
said that, but I've said it in a really desi accent because that's what I've just heard my nanny say.
So what they used to do was there's something called, this is what they call it, the committees, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But in English, I think it's called a menage.
Okay.
So, and this is actually probably where the South Asian fabric shops really begin to come in.
Okay.
So there was a lady called Auntie Rashida Bari. She's probably one of the first people to have opened up a shop. And actually
And when
they
would
used
that
to...
have been?
I'm not sure the exact date, but it probably would have been round about the sort of maybe late 50s, 60s, something like that.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say like 80s or something.
No, so I think it's... So what she did was she had cloth, rolls of cloth at home, and she'd be selling these rolls of cloth at home, and then eventually, outgrew this and thought, right, and these cloths would be things like maybe for bed sheets, for duvets, because people would come here and they'd want to make these things for their own duvets and bed sheets, especially the South Asian women. They used to bring over their own duvets as well because they wasn't sure what was going to be here, and they just knew it was very cold.
Oh my
But
goodness.
they would,
So, sorry, South Asian women would bring duvets from Pakistan or India because they didn't know what was here.
No, because
it was so alien to them.
Because that's a place where they would have cotton, so they'd bring over these really thick, heavy, dense cotton duvets with them, handmade, hand-stitched by their parents, or maybe given to them in their dowry, for example. And they'd bring that with them because it's so cozy. Because it's not the way you and I can just go out and go pick up something in Tesco, Asda, or
So
wherever we go, Argos. It's very different then. So anyway, so this lady would sell these clothes, this kind of loose cloth material, and then she outgrew that business. So then she opens up a shop on Cathcart Road, which, as you and I now know, Cathcart Road is the absolute hub for where you can go now for South Asian clothes.
Yeah.
And that's where obviously, places, people like Auntie Zarina shop was there.
Yeah.
And there's so many other, shops and fabric shops and
That's a childhood
haberdashery
memory,
shops.
going to Cathcart Road, getting dragged around the shops with my mum, to Auntie's Arena's shop and other shops. And now I absolutely love silver companies, but see, as a child, that was trauma going around.
It's really interesting actually how the sort of South Asian fabric shops have developed and how they've grown. Initially, they would have started off with, like I said, working from home. And then when they bought the fabric shops, they would have rolls of fabric. And I remember from hearing from ladies as well, they would have rolls of very shiny, very posh looking fabrics that came from places like Japan and Korea.
Oh, wow.
And this was material that they'd never really felt before, because if you think about it, they've come from Pakistan, which is where they have cotton.
Yeah.
So the cotton material is never made into in a way that it's luxurious, whereas this is silky, it's got patterns on it, it's got different colours, vibrant colours. So they thought, this is what they say, Japani kapra, ye bada acha hai. They say this is really nice. And what they would do is they would get suits cut and then save. And again, the ladies would, allow them to have this on credit so they could pay them in small amounts. And they would take this, gather it up until eventually when they would go to Pakistan or India and then give that as gifts to their friends there and to their relatives. But it wasn't just fabric that was sold there. So we talked about, you talked about what we call the committees. Ladies would then get together and, if they wanted to buy something, for example, or save up for something, they would have these committees, these manojes, and they would all put in money, on a weekly basis until they got to a certain amount. And then based on trust, you think about it, there's no written paperwork or anything. Now that's how close ladies were and people were in those days. And in fact, I've even heard that when the men found out, they thought, we want to do this on a bigger scale within the ladies' fabric shops. So they became like a hub, like a bank for them, because they couldn't get a bank account at that time because, they weren't able to speak the language. Maybe the husbands didn't take them out. So this was a way of them being financially independent.
Wow.
And not just that, but this is where they could speak their language openly and freely, They could discuss what's going on back home. If somebody's travelled back from India, Pakistan, they could talk about weddings, about deaths, about things that were bothering them, talk about children. This is also the place where they would have marriage arrangements. They would get to know one another better and they'd figure out, okay, you've got a son, I've got a daughter. And very often there was, arranged marriages happening in that way. So there was just so much more to it than just fabric.
There you go. You would have just looked at those shops and think they're just selling cuppery.
And of course, they started off obviously with loose fabric. And then what they started doing was making some outfits. And by doing that, they were actually empowering some of the ladies and women at home because they could stitch from home. Right. So they also became like fashion designers. They started the whole fashion trend. They would look at magazines and think, right, let's make a copy of this, hang it up in the shop. And so you were able to then empower other women. And for the first time, the younger generation could now come in and say, I want this made.
Yeah.
And so ladies were then the younger generation beginning to work, which means if they're working, they can then afford their own, whatever they want to buy. So that was fascinating. So much more.
I got really emotional there when you were talking about particularly South Asian women stitching in the house, because that's what my nanny used to do. And I talk about my nanny on the podcast quite a lot. She passed away. It's so weird to say that she passed away last year. She passed away last year. And my mum tells me a story. So my nanny came over with 5 kids from Pakistan, but my mum was the only child that was born in the UK. And my mum says that when she was growing up, Ammi, that's what I used to call her, which means mum. We all used to call her Ammi. Ammi used to stitch in the house and sew, and then she would look at magazines and she would get inspiration from those magazines. She'd then go to the clothes shops. And my family are from Edinburgh, so there wasn't very many there. So I don't know whether there was maybe one or two there, not very many, or if she came through to Glasgow. But then she would get those fabrics and then stitch them up for my mum. And my mum always tells me of this one story of this really, really pretty dress that her mum sewed for her. And I don't know why I'm telling you this, but it's just because
You know
it
what?
reminded me.
What I find is that the women were so talented and they could cook, so they're the center of the family home. And what they did was by cooking from scratch every day, not only are they feeding their family amazing food, but they're also saving a lot. They're not just going out to, like nowadays you can go out to a restaurant or get a carry out or go and buy something at a supermarket. There really wasn't any of that. They had basic ingredients. They had dal, chaval, atta, a few vegetables because, nowadays you can get all sorts of exotic vegetables. Even the halal food shops, there wasn't many.
No,
In fact,
there wasn't at all.
I don't know if you know this, but the men would go out to the farms and that's where they would
Do Gurbani. Or
slaughter
rather-
the chickens. And I don't know about the lamb meat, but definitely for chickens, sometimes they'd bring live chickens home and do it in the bathtub if they had a bathtub. So, or you'd see them, and if they did have a shop, I'm told they also had the chickens in the back that they just grab there and then for you. So very different. So it wasn't consumed as much; it was a luxury.
Yeah.
But they worked with basic ingredients, basic spices, which basic spices they brought with them from back home as well, and they made this amazing foods which people would eat, the family would be fed on, and that's how they saved a lot of money as well. So they
Which is
were
just so different to nowadays where it's so easy just to go into your phone and order a takeaway.
Yeah.
That'll be at your door in 10 minutes.
Yeah. And they also not just they sew clothes, but they also knitted, they also crocheted. So majority of items you'd wear would be ones that your mum or your grandparents had made for you.
Yeah.
It's very
So I
different
have
nowadays.
this really lovely maroon scarf. My daddy and me, so my nanki, like my mum's parents lived in the UK, but my dad's side were in Pakistan. But my daddy, so paternal grandmother and grandfather come over to Scotland and spend time with us, or we'd go back. And I remember, I think I was about 10 years old. My daddy taught me how to knit, and I've still got this really lovely maroon scarf all these years later
Amazing.
that she knitted for me. And they were very skilled, those women. It was like just raw skills. They might not have had an education. They might not have even gone to school, never mind college or university. They might not. I mean, I actually don't think my grandmother and my dad's mum could read and write because she was a teacher back in Pakistan. But I don't think my nanny could. Like, they didn't have basic skills, but then they had other skills that were able to help them.
Absolutely. I mean, and not just for the ladies, but also if you think about the men that came over, they were pretty much, most of them were uneducated. They could barely speak English or understand, but yet they were able to have those kind of, business skills. And from those business skills, move on to sort of shops, and then, from peddlers to shops to becoming, building cash and carries, purpose-built cash and carries. And I think, so for example, Castle Cash and Carry at the time was Europe's largest cash and carry.
Oh, wow.
And not just that, they also got together and they had a responsibility for the community. So we talked about the first mosque, right? We talked about the first Gurdwara. And then you think about, for example, Glasgow Central Mosque, beautiful building. Very much take it for granted nowadays that it's there. But that was one of the biggest and largest community projects by the Pakistani Muslim community, not just the men, but the women as well, that would hold the Meena Bazaars to raise funds, that would go out door to door, and not just in Glasgow, but out of Glasgow to raise funds. And some of those men, there's just so many. I wouldn't be doing justice by naming just a few, but, people like Chaudhry Shaheen Tufail Hussain Saab. We've got the late Uncle Bashir Man, Yaqub Ali. There's Niamat Ali. There was just so many. And again, it shows not just one person individually, but as a team when they worked together. And they were very organised. They held regular meetings. They held minutes, very formal because, they're in a country where they're learning skills. So they're trying to they've put them to use.
Yeah.
And by making use of those kind of skills of being organised and, holding meetings and getting together, and obviously staying in smaller communities, we have this beautiful masjid that opened up in what, the 1983, 84, something like that.
Yeah, and they taught each other as well. So I talk quite often about my Nana Abu, who when he came here in the 60s, he had a little bit of English that he was able to speak and maybe had more English speaking and reading skills than maybe the other people that worked in the factories down in Rochdale. And this is always quite funny because I was an SNP MP, but my Nana Abu back at the time would say to people at general election time, vote for the party with the rose. And if you can't read, try and like work out which party is Labour, and he would like teach them basically like their civic duty in this country. And yeah, so it wasn't just that they would come over here, that they'd have businesses, but actually they got actively involved in British and Scottish culture and society and politics. And before we hit record, I was talking to you about how in fact when we look at politicians across the UK and specifically Muslim politicians, not necessarily South Asian politicians, but of course, the very first Muslim councillor was the late Bashir Mann from Glasgow, the very first Muslim and a devolved legislator was the late Bashir Ahmed in the Scottish Parliament, and then the late Muhammad Asghar in the Welsh Senate, who's actually his daughter, Natasha Asghar, is now a politician there. And then, of course, we've got Uncle Surfer, who is the first Muslim MP. So from the 60s, 70s specifically, because that's when a higher number came over, they really got involved. They really did. And it just feels so at odds at what the far right will say. That, oh, you come here and take our jobs. Well, that's literally not true, pal. Literally not true.
No, they've come here and contributed in such a big way, and forget taking jobs, but they've actually made their own jobs and given jobs to other people. And then, of course, like you said, the civic contribution. We talk about the first Muslim MP the first Muslim councillor, first Muslim MP. But even before that, we have, the first South Asian councillor in the whole Scotland was a person called Dr Janti Das Sagar, who actually came to Dundee in sort of around about 1919 from Dehru. And he came here to study medicine at St Andrews University. Dr Sagar very quickly realised that, the situation in Dundee with, the lifestyle of, with the flats and everything, the tenements, that there was something more he could do in terms of social housing, change, trying to get free travel for the pensioners, trying to get better health for them. So he decided to stand as a Labour councillor in 1936. And, by the time, I think he passed away around about 1950s, early 50s, the Lord Provost said that no son could have done a better job than him. It was a really nice quote that he said, something along those lines. And in fact, they have a street named after him called Sagar Street in Dundee in his memory.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is actually that his great-granddaughter, she now plays hockey for Scotland's national team. Don't ask me what her name is, if that's escaped me. If I remember, I will say. But, it just goes to show the contribution that if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have her playing.
An amazing hockey player.
So that's in sport, So we've gone from being in medicine as a doctor and then to politics to sport. And, in terms of contribution for the South Asians, we've contributed in so many different areas. I mean, if you think about, let's just say, food. The nation's favourite curry, chicken tikka masala. Apparently that was...
Founded in Glasgow.
Yeah, founded in Glasgow. The story goes that there wasn't enough of a sauce, so Mr. Ali decided to open up a can of tomato soup and added that to the chicken tikka to make it into a gravy. And there you go. That's how that was invented. And then we've also got things like in science. So my background is actually in chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of fallen into this heritage space by complete accident over here. But I very recently, a few years back, discovered that, and this is something that I was taught at university about, something called the Poisson-Kund reaction. Now, this is something which makes cyclic structures. So in chemistry, you can have open linear structures, and it's a way to make a cyclic structure, but it's a way to make it in high yield. So and it's using like a metal catalyst at the time. But I had no idea that this reaction involved somebody of a Muslim origin, somebody called Dr. Ihsanullah Khan, right, who who discovered this reaction. And not only that, but he came from Lahore in Pakistan and then studied at Strathclyde University, just up the road from here.
Wow.
And he did his PhD here. And in fact, it used to be called the Khan reaction. But because of his supervisor, Dr. Professor Ludwig Posson, or for whatever reason, eventually the name got changed to the Posson-Khan reaction. So I'm studying this in chemistry in university, not knowing that there was somebody here that had over nearly 30 to 35 papers published on this in the 1970s, or late 1960s, this was published. So for me, this is fascinating. This is a major contribution, and it's something that's not celebrated enough. In fact, it's not even widely known. So that's one of the things that I feel is a fascinating story. It's one of my kind of top gems that not just in business or in politics or food, sort of cuisine, or in whether it's in the NHS, but also in terms of science. And the pharmaceutical industry are still using this reaction in a big way. It's one of the most spoken about reactions in the chemistry world. But it was discovered by Dr. Ihsanullah Khan,
Who moved to Glasgow.
who moved to Glasgow to do his PhD with his whole family.
Amazing.
And in fact, he's the father of the late Imran
Imran
Khan.
Khan, yeah, who then went on to help find Amina.
Amina, yeah. The legacy there, I mean,
Yeah. And for listeners who
amazing.
don't know what Amina is, it's the widely known Muslim Women's Resource Centre based in Glasgow that do some fantastic work. Is it for Muslim women or South Asian women?
I think now it's for pretty much anybody. Yeah.
Anybody, actually.
That's what the original name was.
Yeah. And the late Imran Khan found that. And I mean, there's just so many stories like that. I mean, I was thinking as I was driving into Glasgow about the late Dr. Gosser, who was an institution for the South Asian, for the Muslim community here in Glasgow. And a few weeks ago, I was at a family celebration and I bumped into I always call him Baba Rabani. I suppose it's more polite to say Uncle Rabani, but I think everyone just calls him Baba Rabani. And you've got people like that who have come over, and these elders have sacrificed so much because it's difficult right now in 2026. There's Islamophobia, there's racism, and that has portrayed itself in a different way now in 2026. But when the late Imran Khan, when the late Dr. Gosser, and when Baba Rabbani were growing up, living, working, contributing to Scottish society, life was difficult for them as well. And I think sometimes we forget those stories.
So we actually have the stories of all of those people that you've mentioned on the Colourful Heritage website in the video archive. And a lot of them, they do talk about the racism that they face, but actually they also talk about the kindness of the people. So like we talked about before, that the Scottish story is slightly different because a lot of people were welcomed, whether it was, coming off the airport and a bus driver going off route to make sure that the person got to the destination they wanted, or whether it was just, a kind neighbour just asking how they are and offering them, a cup of tea, or helping them down the stairs of the tenements with the children and the prams. So there's a lot of really nice stories as well. So I think nowadays we're living in very different times. And one of the things that Colourful Heritage want to do is, we've obviously at the back of these interviews and these stories that we have, we've created a whole range of resources. And these resources are to highlight the sort of positive contributions of the sort of South Asian community and the Muslims, of what kind of jobs they did, what kind of activities they were involved in. And at the same time, we want to be able to highlight, where the community started off, for example, 1855, right the way through to, sort of 2025, moving on to 2026, in terms of how we've taken part in, we've even had, Muslim footballers. So for example, we've had a footballer that played, the very first footballer that came to Scotland was in 1922. It was an Egyptian chap who came and played in Cowdenbeath. And again, it's in
No
our
way.
timeline. Yes, he played in the first division, I think it was, or the second division of Cowdenbeath. And then you've come to like 1935. We've had, I think it was somebody called Mustafa that came and played for Rangers. So, and I know that last year was the first time that Rangers had an iftari, and they highlighted this fact was highlighted then. And then we've even got like in 1936, around about the same time as Dr. Sagar, somebody coming to play for Celtic.
Amazing.
Abdul Salim from India, who came and played, and is also known as like Twinkle Toes. He played barefoot. So that's one of the things that I think Atta Yaqub portrayed as well in one of his documentaries. So there's just so many, we've got such a strong connection and shared heritage. And I think our digital timeline, that really highlights it. And I think nowadays the really important thing that we have is our special schools resource pack. And that's something that we've written in conjunction with Glasgow Museums. Now, we have a memorandum of understanding with Glasgow Museums. And so in the last, I would say 5, 6, maybe 7 years, we've had an exhibition at Scotland Street School Museum called the Glaswegian Asians. And we had different themes coming out from that. So we had the entrepreneurial theme, men and women in work. We had World War I, World War II, actually contribution of that. I'm sure we'll come on to at some point. And, we've had politics, we had family and social life, and then education. We've had a whole load of, items, resources. And I think one of the other resources that we have, so the resource pack is actually split into 5 different units. And the first 2 talk about the sort of shared history of all of us as part of World War I and World War II.
And in fact, I actually didn't know that my family or had ancestors that fought in the World Wars. It was only years after I left school and just a few years before my paternal grandfather sadly passed away, where he explains that, in fact, some of his elders and his family fought in the wars. And so much of that is lost. In fact, actually, I have a TikTok up the other week from one of my other podcast episodes, and someone's like, "Oh, the usual racist rubbish. You can't be Scottish and Pakistani and Muslim. Just absolute rubbish." But one person in particular was like, "Well, why did your family come to a Christian country?" I then explained to him, "Well, for my family, kind of after 2 world wars, there was economic shortage across the UK. There was labour shortages. The UK government was actively encouraging people from the Indian subcontinent to move over to the UK and Scotland. And in fact, we've got contributions, loads of contributions." And then he turned around, Saqib, I actually can't believe he said this. He was like, "Where were South Asians in the war? I didn't see any of them in the films from the war. Were they all hiding?" And I was like, well, first of all, let's not use Hollywood as an accurate description of people's contributions to British Army. But yeah, like so much of that is lost. So much of that is lost.
So much of that is lost, but that's one of the sort of topics that we are reviving. There's so much to talk about that in this. And this is what I would say, Ghar Ghar Ki Kahani in Glasgow, because there is such a strong Punjabi community here, the Sikh community, the Pakistani community. And I'm discovering more and more people that are coming up to me, because we've touched on the subject now. So a lot of people coming up to me saying, actually, do you know what? My grandfather was part of this as well. And we're not just talking about a few hundred or a few thousands. We're talking about 4 million soldiers.
Wow.
4 million servicemen, you could say, that were part of both World War I and II. So 1.5 million in World War I and then 2.5 million in World War II. And I just find it fascinating that, we have something like nearly 5,000-6,000 memorials, war memorials in Scotland, and not a single one is for the British Indian Army. So that's something that we're looking to change. But I guess in terms of educating, our younger generation, this is something that's not taught in schools at all. So what we're doing at Colourful Heritage, we've now got our schools resource pack, in conjunction with Glasgow Museums. And very often, now word is getting out there. Now I'm getting to a point where schools are actually inviting me in to come and talk to their young people because they cover that in primary 7, for example. And I go in and I deliver workshops. We also have another exhibition at Kelvin Grove Art Galleries called Glass Asians in World War II. So the Scotland Street School Museum exhibition was closed down because they needed to refurbish the building. So everything went into storage. This particular sort of the items that were loaned actually at the time, what we realise is that museums don't have enough about our history. And so that's one of the reasons why, Colourful Heritage started up as well, because there was a sort of an archival silence. And particularly in fact, in all the areas, the only thing we really have going for us is Uncle Bashir Man's books, what he's written. But in this particular area, this is a shared history area. So this is one of the more important areas. So the exhibition that we have at Glaswegian Asians talks about a special regiment called Force K6. And I'll come back onto that in a minute. But it also talks about the story of Naik Gyan Singh, who's Naik Gyan Singh VC. VC stands for Victoria Cross. That's one of the highest medals for bravery that the UK government will give for bravery to anybody that was part of World War I and II. And if you think about 4 million soldiers, right, from all of those, only 39 South Asians were awarded Victoria Cross. Such a tiny number.
Such a small proportion.
And Gyan Singh's son lives in Glasgow, and he happens to have his father's Victoria Cross. And the thing is, you'll find this across, the South Asian community quite happily, they just work away. They don't, they're very humble.
Yeah.
They work away,
Especially
away.
that older generation.
The older generation, yeah. They work away. They're very humble. They don't want to, beat the drum about what they've done, which is why it's important that we do tell their stories. But this was like a hidden gem. So when I got whiff of this, I realised, I wanted it in this, I wanted this story to come out. So got in touch and we got he had his grandfather's medal. We got that evaluated at the BBC Antiques Roadshow. Do you have any idea what a Victoria Cross medal is worth?
No.
Take a rough guess.
Oh, I'm terrible at this.
Take a guess.
I mean, a couple of £1,000.
Higher.
10,000?
Higher.
20?
Higher.
25.
So a Victoria Cross is worth up to £1 million.
What?
So when we went on the Antiques Roadshow, this particular one was evaluated at £250,000.
Wow.
So this is like a national treasure, really.
And it's just in their loft.
It was just they just had this medal, but didn't know what to do with it, where to put it. So that's on display now at the museum, and I'm very proud that we've got it in there because usually you'd have to go to London to the Imperial War Museums to see this, but this has got a Scottish connection, a Scottish story behind it. And what's really interesting is that the reason that Gyan Singh was awarded this medal was because he captured an anti-tank gun from the Japanese, which he was part of the 15th Punjab Regiment. And the 15th Punjab Regiment is now based in Pakistan because after partition, that regiment went to the Pakistan side and he donated this anti-tank gun that he'd captured, said that it will stay with my regiment as opposed to keeping it with him. And he was in India. So it's such a nice sort of shared heritage, social cohesion story. It's so beautiful. And of course, I want to clarify that the British Indian Army itself is a term that we use. It's the original term, and it's for anybody that was part of the British Indian Army before partition. After the partition, we had Indian Army and the Pakistan Army. This encompasses both those countries before partition. So it's very much a story and history for Pakistan, present-day Pakistan, and India and Bangladesh as well.
I'm always fascinated by the story of Force K6.
Force K6 is mainly a Muslim sort of contingent, you could say, that came from India. And they left Bombay and arrived in Marseille in France on Boxing Day. I think it was 1941, something like that. And from there, they eventually travelled, and they were actually there to help the sort of British Expeditionary Forces because they needed help with transport during the war. Now you can imagine in a war, sort of like in a war zone, the trenches are muddy. So they needed people that could bring animals with them. So this is a very special regiment that were trained to with mules. So the mules could carry, heavy goods. They had carts attached to them as well. So they could transport, all sorts of items to the front line and generally around about as well, whether that was munition or clothing or food. So they called in Force K6 to France. And what's really interesting is on the beaches of Dunkirk, in the movie Dunkirk, I think by is it Christopher Nolan or Anthony Nolan, on the beaches of Dunkirk, we didn't know this before, but only now this has been highlighted, that there were nearly 400 men led by Major Akbar Khan, who was who was in the Pakistan Army as well, who went on to being in the Pakistan Army. It was led by Major Akbar Khan to safety back to Britain. So they were rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk, and they were rescued from there with the help of Captain John Ashton, who is the father of the late Paddy Ashton. So he helped bring these men back as well. Otherwise, they were just left there to die. And what's really interesting is that they came to Cornwall, and then from Cornwall they eventually travelled to, they were based around, they visited all sorts of places, but they were based in Wales where a few of them passed away. And then from there they also came to Scotland, and they were in around the area of Canusie and beyond, in fact all over the Highlands. And there's in fact the largest gravesite for them here in Scotland.
That's right.
There's 14 of them died here. 13 are buried. One was cremated. His name was Mungley. And 9 of them are buried in Canusie Cemetery. And it's such a heartwarming story that, they came here to train to be able to go and fight in Norway from something called Operation Jupiter. So it was like Winston Churchill's mad plan. But while they were here in Scotland, they trained, and several of them sadly passed away through, illnesses, accidents. And Canusie Cemetery is somewhere where we have also the story of Isabel Harling. Do you know much? Have you heard of Isabel
No.
Harling? So Isabel Harling is a local resident. She's passed away now, aged 100. But she looked after the graves, or tended to the graves actually. She laid her poppies there. She would go and talk to them. She would go and tidy up the graves from the sort of wartime. Beautiful. And look after these 9. And she calls them her boys.
How beautiful.
So she calls them her boys. And in fact, when she passed away, she's buried right opposite them now. And her family have now taken on that role, to look after them. Of course, nowadays they're looked after by the Commonwealth Grave Commission.
Why do you think it was so important for her to look after those graves?
So she has a brother who also passed away while at war in Belgium. And she said the people there look after his grave. And she had not visited that grave for a long time. She didn't even know, in fact, where he was buried. So she said that these boys came so far from home to fight for us, to fight for Britain. It's only right that we look after them. That was her quote.
I remember this story. I do. What a beautiful thought. But also, I don't know what the term British values means. I just think it's such a weird term because people come to this country from different places all around the world, and I suppose that's the best of Britain and that's the best of Scotland. And to me, that's what a British value or a Scottish value is. I think sometimes that phrase is appropriated by the far right. But the story of Isabel Harding, did you say?
Isabel Harling, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The story of Isabel Harling is just so beautiful because at its core, this is a woman whose family member is buried in Belgium, and she knows that people out there are looking after those graves. And so she's got a grave or a cemetery with graves of different South Asian men, and she's looking after that. See that? That is a British value. That's a Scottish value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
How
such
beautiful.
she's so selfless, caring, and it's such a nice story to share with our young people that, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be of the same faith, the same culture. It's about human values, isn't it? It's about sort of humanitarian, sort of the human kindness that you have. And these men weren't even related to her, nothing to do with her. In fact, she would place a cross when it came to, remembrance, a poppy with a cross on it, even though they were Muslim. They're facing, their graves are slightly angled as well. But for the love of another human person and to be kind, it's just such a warming story.
That's beautiful. Kindness doesn't see colour.
No, it doesn't see colour.
Kindness doesn't see skin colour. Kindness doesn't see faith. Kindness just sees another human being.
And in fact, what we did was we've done a few remembrance services in Canusi now with the local community there. And what we do is we take a coach load of people from here, from the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the Pakistani community, other communities as well, the Scottish people as well. And we have a whole coach load. We go up and we have our samosa, we have our desi chai on board the coach. When we get there, we have the army people involved, we have diplomats involved, and we have a formal remembrance service. We'll have bagpipes, we have a dua, a prayer, an Islamic one. We also have a blessing from a church minister as well. And it's a way to then get together over lunch to let people talk about these stories and share and learn, from one another as well.
And remember.
And remember the sacrifices of everyone, but in particular this regiment. And in fact, since we've been going up for remembrance services, we've noticed that, we'll do school talks there as well. We've noticed the local community are a lot more aware of this because this is on their doorstep. The cemetery lies just outside Canusi. But what the locals have done there is they have now raised awareness through creating a memorial for them. It's a beautiful granite memorial. It has a cross on it. It has the Om, the Hindu Om symbol, because one of the soldiers that passed away was a Hindu, or being a Sikh, Mangali. And they've also got some Arabic text as well. So it's bringing all the different faiths together. And each name of those 14 people that are buried in Scotland is in gold lettering with their number of, the service number as well. And it's got a nod to Isabel Harling saying, "We are all Jock Tamson's bairns."
We are all Jock Tamson's bairns, right? What a beautiful way to end the podcast. Is there anything that we missed out?
Yes, so we're talking about memorials. We also now have we have planning permission for a memorial. We have a design. And in fact, just last year at the end of October, we have started the building work for what we'd call Scotland's first British Indian Army memorial.
Wow.
Most likely it'll be the National Memorial for the British Indian Army. And that is, again, just outside Kelvin Grove Art Galleries where our exhibition is. So we've got phase 1 completed. We've got the paving done. Alhamdulillah. That's taken, a good few weeks. And now, inshallah, we hope to have phase 2 where we're looking to get, some benches, maybe get some information about the sort of superstructure. The structure itself will be like a South Asian style chadri, hopefully red sandstone. And we're looking to have the faith symbols for the different communities. So we'll have like a crescent and a star. We're looking to have the Ganda, the Sikh Ganda, the Om, and then one pillar for no faith, because there was a lot of people of no faith as well. And so we want to be trying to be as inclusive as possible for all the different faiths that were part of the British Indian Army. And I think that's another really big sort of community project where everyone should be helping in. And what we've got now is we've got about just over 100,000 raised. We have a Just Giving page. You can connect to that from our website, colourfulheritage.com. And also we have a sort of a unique way for people who want to have their own family legacy remembered or be part of this project. And if they're donating £10,000, they can have their organisation or family name on the memorial. And there's just very few spaces on that at the moment. There's only 20 spaces in total. So there's been quite a few people, quite a fair bit of interest from the community to be part of this sort of shared history project.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Before we wrap up, one of our sections is a this or that section. So I know that you've heard the podcast before, Saqib, so I don't know if you remember this, but towards the end, it's just a quick fire round. Don't think too hard about the questions. She's got her cup of tea. She's ready. She's ready. The first question is really easy. Do you prefer tea or coffee?
Tea.
But then I always ask this, or I should ask this, is it like a Tetley tea bag? Because I know how you feel about Tetley tea. Or would it be like proper desi chai made in the house?
Totally the Scottish way. Just
Really?
non-desi.
Oh
completely.
no, so I'm a big Gurrick chai fan. But like it needs to be made in the house and let it buck for ages to get those tastes and flavours.
Quick and easy, on to other things.
You sound like a mum.
I am.
The stories that you've collected across Colourful Heritage are just so fascinating. But is there one that sticks out to you?
Well, we've already talked about a few stories already, right? One that I didn't mention, and it'd be nice to finish off on this as well, this particular story, but I told you about the 9 graves that we have in Canusie. Last year, was it year before? The year before, we managed to locate one of the ancestors for that grave. However, this year, again, through social media, through our website, I'm not sure how, but the great-grandson of Dadan Khan, who's buried there, got in touch saying, hey guys, I'm the great-grandson of this person. And he provided evidence leading up to, how he's related. And then he sent a picture of his great-grandfather in the uniform. And, that just blew me away. It's amazing.
And where does this guy live? Is he in Scotland or has he moved?
No. So he's from Pakistan.
So
he lives in Pakistan. Yeah. And, he's given evidence. And I asked, how did you find out? He said, he had a service number.
Mm-hmm.
So he jumped on the Commonwealth Grave Commission website and found out from there where Dadan Khan was buried with that service number.
Wow.
And we've done so much work covering that.
Yeah.
But he was just ecstatic.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. So we're
looking now to get sort of medallic recognition for him, for his great-grandfather, and get that story out as well.
The last thing I'm going to ask you is, a lot of this conversation has been about documenting the journey of South Asians to Scotland and their contributions, but kind of looking forward to the future for the next generation of South Asians, whether they're going to immigrate to this country or if, like you and I, they've born, raised and lived here their whole life. What is one thing that you'd want them to take forward?
I would want them to know about the huge contribution that the South Asian Muslim community have made, whether it's to business, politics, the world of, sort of cuisine, and also in terms of the contribution, the huge contribution actually to both world wars, because I think that would really help to make them stronger in their identity. A lot of young people nowadays can have, sort of identity crisis and this sense of,
definitely
don't feel the sense of belonging. And I think all of these add up to show us how much contribution and how, if we talk about Scotland, how Scottish we feel, in terms of how much we've contributed and made Scotland our home,
And also help us tackle the far right, I suppose,
exactly,
as well.
because this is something that, the far right don't know about or put blinkers towards. But if they know this, the story of the world wars, that would, comatize the far right, I would imagine, because it's such a powerful story to know that we were right there, right behind them, fighting for Britain, to protect Britain, for a country that's not even your own. And then coming here and building this country with our own hands. And even today, we still are. There's so many of us that are in the NHS. There's so many that are in jobs that are helping our community as a whole. But it really needs to be, highlighted and I want the young people to know that, we've done a lot for Scotland, we've done a lot for UK, and to be proud of their identity, be proud of their heritage. And once armed with these facts, they're able to then say back. If anybody, asks them, they have answers. They can point, okay, well, actually, this is what we've done. If not, direct them to the website and say, well, why don't you go and look for yourself? It's just huge.
No, well, thank you
Massive.
so much for joining us. And also thank you so much, Saqib, for the work that you do and for the work of the organisation that is Colourful Heritage. I always love seeing you. I always love bumping into you at different events because I feel like one of the questions I always ask is, right, Saqib, what's new on the timeline? And I actually didn't know I was on the timeline until you told me
Of course,
last year in August. So of course I was elected in May 2021 and I had no idea I was on the timeline, and
Yeah.
you told me last year we were at a charity event where I bumped into you and I was shocked.
Mashallah, the
Yeah.
contributions are so huge now from the
Alhamdulillah,
community
yeah.
that it's difficult to keep up
Yeah, I
with what to
bet.
put on the timeline.
Yeah.
Now, we're being awarded MBEs and OBEs and, opening up all sorts of businesses and, becoming really involved in sports and politics. So we've got a whole sports section within the timeline. There's just so much happening that, alhamdulillah, we're doing really, really well, mashallah.
No, I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful chatting to you.
History only survives if it's passed on. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd highly encourage you to check out the work of Colourful Heritage. I'll link their website and social media platforms in the comments box. Please share these stories, talk about them, and teach them, because visibility in history isn't a luxury, it's a form of belonging. Thank you so much to Dr. Saqib for joining me today. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe to DemocraTEA and follow us on social media. Share this episode with a friend and let us know your thoughts, because these conversations don't end when the microphones switch off. I'm Anam Gesar, and this has been DemocraTEA, spilling the tea on people, power, and politics.